Hi, my name is Barb Nangle. I'm the founder of Higher Power Coaching and Consulting. I want to welcome you to my podcast, Fragmented to Whole, Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery. This is episode 28, Healthy versus Unhealthy. What's your motivation? Intention or motivation matters. Whether you're trying to discern the difference between healthy alone time and isolation, helpful behavior versus rescuing behavior, privacy versus secrecy, or dissociation versus playing and having fun, figuring out what your motive is going to help you understand what's healthy and what's unhealthy. I started noticing that my motivation really mattered when I was learning about the difference between helpful behavior and rescuing behavior. I talked about this in an earlier episode, but just in case you haven't listened to it, I'll mention it again. When I was learning about codependence and what that meant, I could see that there was a continuum of helpful behavior where on one end, there was kindly, helpful, functional behavior. And on the other end of the continuum, there's unhelpful, rescuing, manipulative behavior. And I could easily tell the difference between the two ends of the continuum, but I didn't understand, where do you cross over from being helpful to being rescuing? The middle part of the continuum, I just didn't understand. Somebody said to me very early, weeks into recovery, it depends on your motivation. If you're doing something that's so that someone will like you or so that they'll think a certain thing of you, then it's dysfunctional, manipulative, and perhaps even rescuing behavior. Well, I didn't get that because honestly, at the time, I didn't even know that my people-pleasing, rescuing behaviors were to get people to like me or to get some particular outcome. Until I could see that question of motives was patently unhelpful to me. Once I came to understand that that was what I was doing, it made all the difference in the world. Then that question of motives was really helpful to me. So now I understand that the difference between kindly, helpful behavior that's functional and dysfunctional, rescuing, manipulative behavior is my motive. If I'm helping someone because I want to be a kind and good person and because that's what God wants me to be, then that is healthy. However, if I am trying to rescue someone because I think I can save them or because I think that if they would just do what I say, then their lives would be better, or I want people to think that I'm nice or that I'm good or I'm smart or helpful or whatever, then that is dysfunctional behavior. So because of all that, I've had this idea about motives in my head. And as I've gone farther along in my recovery, I've noticed that question of motivation helps me to understand the difference between other things as well. So it helps me to understand the difference between healthy alone time versus isolation. It helps me know the difference between privacy and secrecy. And it helps me determine the difference between dissociation and just having fun. So look at what your motivation is when you're trying to figure out whether your behavior is helping you or hurting you, healthy or unhealthy. You can actually change your motivation. Your motivation is a decision that you make. So you decide, I am going to do this for X reason. So I hope that's helpful. Now I'm going to talk about those different distinctions I mentioned. First, healthy alone time versus isolation. I know the difference between healthy alone time and isolation by my motives. For healthy alone time, I am purposefully being alone and I am doing something that brings me joy and contentment and probably gives me energy. I am isolating, which I did constantly for decades before recovery, if I am trying to fend off the world and thus my energy is being drained because of the energy I'm expending to try to fend off the world. And I'm probably not treating myself right when I'm isolating. I'm probably doing something that's unhealthy and to my detriment, like drinking, smoking weed, binge watching TV, or binging on food. So my motivation there is to remove myself from the world, to be alone, and perhaps to punish myself. Or some of us actually actually tell ourselves, I deserve this, insert unhealthy behavior here, when in fact, it's not something that's good for us. We tell us that we're taking care of ourselves when in fact we're punishing ourselves. Whereas the motive for my healthy alone time is to be good to myself, to bring joy and contentment, and probably increase my energy. A friend of mine from recovery recently told me that she has started romancing herself, which is different than self-love. Instead of waiting to do things with a partner, she's getting dressed up and taking herself out to do the kinds of things that she's not allowed herself to do alone. And she's found that to be an incredibly empowering experience and a great way to have healthy alone time. Then we have the difference between privacy and secrecy. The difference typically has to do with boundaries versus shame. So if you're motivated to keep something private from someone, it is probably because you have made a conscious decision that this is none of their business. This is a boundary that I'm drawing and I'm not sharing it with people, or at least not right now. As you get to know someone better, you might decide you're willing to share private information with them. Whereas if you want to keep something a secret, it's typically because you have shame about that thing and you don't want people to know. Either because you want them to think a certain thing of you and you know they won't if they know this thing, or because you know you don't have the wherewithal to have boundaries with someone. And so you have to keep it a secret from them because you're not allowed to have privacy because you don't have boundaries. If that's the case, then you might be someone who is enmeshed, in which case you might want to listen to the previous episode, Getting Out of Enmeshment. My point is, if you are keeping something a secret, you don't typically feel good about it, and you're probably afraid for people to find out this thing. And that, my friends, is one of the amazingly beautiful things about recovery. You get to release the burden of lifelong secrets with your sponsor and with your fellows, who have probably done stuff worse than you have, and not be judged by those people, because we are all human beings who are flawed and make mistakes. And I'd like to take this time to remind you that no matter what you've done, you are flawsome. Just because you're flawed doesn't mean you're not awesome. And just because you're awesome doesn't mean you're not flawed. You are awesome in your flawedness, and you are flawed in your awesomeness. When it comes to secrecy, your motivation of why you are keeping information to yourself helps you to understand if it's healthy or unhealthy. If you're keeping it private, it's because you're setting a boundary that's probably healthy. And if you're keeping it a secret, you probably have some kind of shame and it's probably unhealthy. And then the last thing I want to share has to do with what's the difference between dissociating and doing something just for the heck of it to have fun. I was talking with a fellow last week about this, as a matter of fact, and we were talking about the fact that you can engage in the exact same activity to dissociate, which is unhealthy, and to just have fun, which is healthy. So video games is a really good example. If you play video games for 15 hours on end and that's all you're doing and you're ignoring all your responsibilities and you're avoiding things like feelings or work because it makes you feel inadequate or you're afraid you're going to be a failure, that, my friends, is dissociating. But if you have decided, I'm going to set an hour aside and play this game that I'm really excited to play because it just came out, and you really have fun doing it, and it's a conscious choice that you've made, then that's probably healthy fun. But the point is, what's your motivation? When we're dissociating, our motivation is to avoid or to numb. It's definitely an escape. And we might even feel compelled to do it. Whereas when we're doing something to just play and have fun, we're looking at it as something that we want to do, that we desire to do, and something that's actually bringing us joy and in which we're having fun. And it's also not going to be a never-ending activity. It's going to have an end to it. I know a number of people in recovery who've given up their addictive substances, but then they binge watch Netflix all the time, even when it's to their detriment. Like they stay up until 4 o'clock in the morning doing it, and then they have to go to work the next day. That is not healthy. In fact, I've heard it called the drug of the plug. To recap, your motivation for your behavior is what's going to help you understand whether it's healthy or unhealthy, be it helpful behavior versus rescuing behavior, healthy alone time versus isolation, privacy versus secrecy, or dissociation versus just having fun. So remember to ask yourself, what is my motivation here? Why am I doing this? If it's something that you're purposefully choosing and it gives you energy, it's probably good. If it's something you feel compelled to do that drains your energy, and perhaps you even lie about it or feel shame about it, it's probably unhealthy. And you can change that. You can make a decision about that. You can invite your higher power to help you change your motivation. I hope that what I've learned here about motivation has been helpful to you in your journey of recovery. Namaste. That's it for today. If you like what you've heard here, then you just might be interested in private coaching with me. If that sounds like you, head on over to my website, which is higherpowercoachingandconsulting.com, and click on the contact menu. I'd be happy to schedule a consultation with you to help you make lasting changes in your life, like I've made deep, lasting changes in my life. My ideal client is someone who is ripe for change, but I'll coach anyone who wants to be happy, joyous, and free. So if that's you, shoot me an email. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe so you can be sure to get future episodes of my podcast. Thanks again.